Hi, this is the first of a number of videos in which I'm going to go over array lists. In this video, I'm going to go over using array list with string objects. And so let's get right into it. So I first declare an array list that will hold strings. And these are called array lists use what are known as templated classes, which means they use these angle brackets to specify what type of object the array list is holding. So in this case, we're saying to Java, hey, array list, I'm going to make an array list that will hold string objects. Or as we know by now, that will actually hold references to string objects, right? And so we have to actually make the array lists or objects. So we have to make the new array list. And again, when we make it, we have to specify what's it going to hold using the angle brackets surrounding the type, the class type, which is string. And then we just need these parentheses because we're, in fact, when we make this new ArrayList object, that ArrayList object has a constructor. So we're saying in this case, use the default constructor for ArrayList. There's another constructor where you can specify the size of the underlying array. And your book covers that, as does the Stanford lecture, so I'm not going to cover that here. So at this point, we've created an array list. Now, it's unpopulated. There's nothing in it. And so we're going to use an array of strings to populate it. So we first create the array of strings called word list, and then we put these words in it. So now in the constructor for this class, I'm using a for each loop here. And let's go over the for each loop again, because I think there's still some confusion about it. You specify the type of object in the list that you're going through. Now word list, it contains strings. So we're saying, okay, this is a list of strings. Then we specify a variable, could be anything. Right? We supply it. Then we specify the list. In this case, the list is called word list. So that's what you do inside the parentheses of a for each loop. The type, a variable name that you supply, and then the name of the list. Then inside of here, what we're going to do is tell the array list words, right, to call its add method. And the ArrayList add method wants passed in as the actual parameter an object of the type that the ArrayList references. So to back up just a second, what the for each loop is going to do is it's going to make this variable w equal to every element of the list, but one at a time. So w will first be equal to dog, then it will do the body of the loop, then w will be equal to cat, then it will do the body of the loop, then horse, body of the loop, etc. Okay? So, so what we're going to do is add all the words here in word list to the array list words. So let's compile and run this. And we'll make a new one of these. And we're just going to inspect it. You can just double click to get to this window. So first, just for old time's sake, let's look at the array of strings, right? And its length is 8, and there are the 8 strings. And so that's cool, we understand that. So now let's look at what the ArrayList object consists of. So we double click that. And it says, okay, we'll look down here first. It says it has a size, it has a private integer field called size, and it has a protected integer field called mod count. We'll forget about mod count for a minute. We'll just look at size. And we'll get to protected down the road. It's there are public and private, and protected is another way to limit access to a field. But for now, let's just focus on the size. So the size of this array list is 8, meaning that's the number of elements that are stored in the array list. Now, what's this? Private object, an array, because we know the array notation, an array of objects called element data. Well, what is object? What is the object class? It's the superclass for all other classes. So if you create an array of the object class, you can store references to any subclass object, and string is a subclass of the object class. So we've got an array of object references here, and if we double click on that, whoa, wait a minute, this looks familiar. Length, isn't that something from the array class? Yeah, and look, it has a length of 10, and we're using 8 of those cells, leaving 2 set to null. So what you should get out of this is an understanding that array lists are actually using arrays under the hood to store their information. And they're also they have a field called size that tells the ArrayList class how much of the array that they're actually using. So in this case, they're using 8 elements of the array, right? And because the array is of size 10, there are 2 spots that are set to null that are not used, right? Make sense? So let's come back here, and we'll uncomment 2 of these lines. Uncomment. And what do these do? These, each for the words array list, they call the add method. And I'm supplying the object, in this case 2 strings, that should be added to the array list. And the add method adds them at the end. So we'll compile that, make a new array list, and let's go see what happened here. The size is now 10, makes sense, we added 2. So if we go look at the array now, that's where the information is actually stored, we see that it's full, right? And so now let's go back here, and we'll uncomment this one additional line. So now we're adding an 11th element. So let's see what that does. The size is now 11. Okay, but what happened to the array? The array length is now 15. And there's hamster at the end, and they're now 4. That was one of the 5 cells added, and now there are 4 cells at the end set to null. So what happened here is that the ArrayList class has code to automatically, when the underlying array size is exceeded through the use of add, it creates a new array, copies all the elements from the old array over into the new array, and then deletes the old array and uses the new array. You can see here it added 5 when we exceeded the size. So whoever wrote this code said, okay, they probably are going to be adding more. So rather than just making the array 1 size bigger, I'm going to make it 5 cells bigger. That way they can add 4 more before I have to copy over the old array into a new array, delete the old array, and use the new array. All right? So in your book, in section 13.4, I think that's where that's discussed. I'm not actually sure, but this is an issue with array lists, right? Because although you don't have to do the work, the computer is doing the work underneath the hood, and there is a time cost to doing this. So depending upon what your program is, you have to be aware that your code may be going through the process of creating a new array, copying elements from an old array over into the new array. All that takes time. So, you know, in some cases that doesn't matter. In some cases it matters very much. You just have to be aware of it. Okay. So now just a couple more array list things in this video. So we can remove elements, the objects that are in particular positions in the array list with the remove method. Now what the remove method wants is a valid index in the array, in the underlying array, to remove. So it's going to remove whatever object is referenced from that position. So what I'm doing here inside of here is I'm using the index of method of the array class. And what that does is it returns the index of an object. In this case, the string object zebra returns the index within the array where that's located, right? So that returns a number, an integer, and then I'm in essence then immediately plugging that number into the remove method and removing whatever's there. So and I'm also storing it in a local variable because the remove method not only removes it, but it returns whatever the object is, or it returns a reference to the object. And I'm storing that in Z, and you know, it just, so we'll prove that system.out.println Z. So this should compile. I'm going to make a new one of these. It should output zebra. It did. Cool. Now let's inspect this. And what we should find is that zebra is no longer there. Zebra's gone. It's been removed. Now notice what happened. Zebra was between pig and lion. But when we remove zebra, lion and hamster shifted down. So whenever you remove an element from an array list, all the values, all the occupied cells above it are automatically shifted down to fill in that hole. So that's great, right? But they're also, you have to be careful about that. And the first program you have to write for this week makes sure that you understand how to do that correctly, or how to write a method that will allow you to correctly delete objects of a certain type from an array list. Okay, and I'll specify more about that in the problem assignment. Okay, that's it on this opening video about array lists.